Paul's perseverance, from persecutor to persecuted. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Damascus road as Saul of Tarsus pressed forward, letters of authority clutched in his hands. Born in Tarsus, educated under the renowned Gamaliel, he was a Hebrew of Hebrews, Philippians chapter 3 verse 5. His zeal for the Jewish law drove him to become the chief persecutor of this new movement called the Way. The execution of Stephen, where he stood watching the cloaks of those who stoned the first Christian martyr, had only fueled his righteous anger. Little did he know that this journey would transform him from feared persecutor to passionate apostle, from hunter to hunted. Around noon, when the Syrian sun was at its fiercest, the blinding light struck. Brighter than the midday sun, it forced Saul and his companions to the ground. The voice spoke in Hebrew Acts chapter 26 verse 14, adding personal weight to the confrontation. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads." This metaphor of a rebellious ox kicking against the farmer's prod would have resonated deeply with Saul, suggesting his futile resistance against divine purpose. For 3 days in Damascus, he stayed in the house of Judas on Straight Street, a location still pointed out in Damascus today. His blindness was both literal and symbolic. The scales of religious pride, of misguided zeal, of self-righteousness needed to fall away. Ananias, despite his initial fear of Saul's reputation, became God's instrument of healing and commissioning. The scales fell from his eyes, and with them, his old identity. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. In the very synagogues where he had planned to arrest Christians, he now proclaimed Jesus as the Son of God. The Jewish leaders were stunned. Wasn't this the same men who had ravaged the church in Jerusalem? Their confusion turned to rage, and soon they plotted to kill him. The hunters became the hunted. The escape from Damascus marked his first taste of persecution. Under cover of darkness, disciples lowered him in a basket through an opening in the city wall, a humbling experience for the once proud Pharisee. In Jerusalem, he faced skepticism from the very Christians he had once persecuted. Only Barnabas's vouching for him opened doors to fellowship with the apostles. His sufferings, catalogued in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, paint a vivid picture. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1, a punishment so severe that Jewish law required careful counting to prevent death. 3 times I was beaten with rods, by Roman authorities, a punishment that could cripple or kill. Once I was stoned, in Lystra, where he was dragged outside the city and left for dead. The Philippian jail episode showcases Paul's extraordinary perspective on suffering. After being stripped, beaten, and thrown into the inner prison with their feet fastened in stocks, Paul and Silas didn't curse their fate, they sang hymns. The earthquake that followed wasn't just a physical liberation, it led to the jailer's family's spiritual liberation. His Roman imprisonments produced what scholars call the prison epistles: Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Each letter reveals a man whose physical confinement only expanded his spiritual influence. To the Philippians, he wrote of finding contentment in all circumstances, a lesson learned through decades of hardship. To the Ephesians, he painted the magnificent picture of spiritual warfare while bound in physical chains. To Philemon, he demonstrated how the gospel transforms social relationships. The journey to Rome reads like an ancient maritime thriller. The ship, carrying 276 souls, battled a ferocious Mediterranean storm called Euroclydon. For 14 days, they saw neither sun nor stars, critical for ancient navigation. Paul's leadership emerged as he encouraged the crew, shared an angel's vision of survival, and prevented the sailors from abandoning ship. On Malta, the snakebite incident demonstrated divine protection. The locals, seeing the viper fasten onto his hand, expected him to swell up and die, a natural assumption given the deadly nature of Malta's vipers. When Paul simply shook it off into the fire, they reversed their judgment, seeing him as a god. This opened doors for ministry, leading to the healing of Publius's father and many others on the island. In Rome, though under house arrest, Paul turned his confinement into an opportunity. For 2 years, he received visitors freely, chained to a rotating guard who became his captive audience. Many of these guards likely became Christians, leading Paul to write that his imprisonment had served to advance the gospel throughout the whole Praetorian Guard, Philippians chapter 1 verse 13. His letters from this period reflect a man who saw beyond his circumstances. To the Philippians, he wrote, "What has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel." To Timothy, facing his likely execution, he penned triumphant words, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 7. Paul's influence on Christianity cannot be overstated. His 13 letters form nearly half of the New Testament. The churches he planted created a network that spread the gospel throughout the Roman Empire. His theological insights have shaped Christian thinking for 2 millennia. The young rabbi who once terrorized the church became its most ardent defender. His transformation demonstrates that no past is too dark for God's light to penetrate. His perseverance through suffering shows that trials, rather than destroying faith, often reveal its deepest strength. As he wrote, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 8-9. The power of Paul's story lies not just in his dramatic conversion but in his enduring faithfulness through relentless persecution. His life proves that our greatest trials often become our greatest testimonies, that suffering can serve a divine purpose, and that no obstacle is too great for God's purposes to prevail. Unlock the secrets of the divine with the Eternal Echoes channel. Subscribe now for exclusive access to mesmerizing content that sparks curiosity and ignites your imagination.